Hello everyone, back to my movie review channel. Today I would like to bring you the movie, Evil Dead Rise, 2023, by director Lee Cronin. In 1982, Sam Raimi's innocently titled The Evil Dead attempted to cross the Atlantic and find greener pastures in UK cinemas. What the movie instead discovered was the humorlessness of the British Board of Film Classification. There, the film's lurid imagery of possessed flesh being obliterated by axes, chainsaws, and even a tree branch in one especially grotesque sequence, was perceived as the very definition of obscene. To receive an X rating in the UK, Raimi and company eventually agreed to shave off 49 seconds of grossness. That fight would be small potatoes, though, when compared to what happened after the National Viewers and Listeners Organization, a pro-censorship group, got their hands on the VHS. Practically off the back of Evil Dead alone, the Video Recordings Act was passed in '84. The Evil Dead's UK videotapes were removed from circulation until a further 66 seconds of the movie were exorcised, and a heavily censored version could be re-released under a new unofficial classification. As per the NVALA, it was a video nasty. Ever since then, Evil Dead has been synonymous as a franchise with splatterfest imagery and violence so gratuitous that its depravity is the stuff of legend. And yet, no movie in the series has really challenged the first Evil Dead's grotesquerie in the ensuing decades. Evil Dead 2, 1987, and Army of Darkness, 1992, were increasingly comedic premises where the gruesome turned into the goofy. Meanwhile, Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead remake of 2013 came closer to that original sensibility by playing things a lot more sinister. Yet while I'm a fan of how hard that movie goes, it still can never be quite as shocking as the '81 original because it's once again about a group of 20-somethings in a cabin in the woods being massacred by demons. Plus, you're allowed to take things only so far in a movie rated R by the American Ratings Board. Then again, maybe you're not? That was certainly part of my takeaway after watching Lee Cronin's delightfully cruel Evil Dead Rise, a movie so malevolent, mean-spirited, and gory that its rating suggests the NC-17 rating has been retired, unless your film dares have too much nudity. Truly, Evil Dead Rise is a thoroughly depraved and fucked up piece of work, and possibly the nastiest thing the franchise has seen in the last 40 years. On the surface, that isn't necessarily a surprise. Like Evil Dead, 2013, it features all the hallmarks of the series. Innocent fools who dared open the Book of the Dead being possessed by demons from hell. Those possessed bodies, or deadites, then reveal a wicked sense of humor as they sing ditties like Dead by Dawn. And finally, bodies are dismembered, usually by chainsaw. Nonetheless, what makes Evil Dead Rise just a little sicker than the 2013 film, and perhaps even Raimi's original video nasty, is who is transforming into those deadites and what then happens to them. The young people of Alvarez's 2013 movie are more plausibly believable as human beings than Raimi's original cast. That time, they were out there to help a friend who was struggling with addiction, as opposed to being there to share booze and sex. Still, the film is playing in the sandbox of horror movie conventions and cliches that were already old hat in 1981. A group of nubile young people go to the woods and get massacred. The setup in Evil Dead joints has always been an excuse to reveal inventive and even innovative filmmaking while slaughtering a fresh-faced ensemble. Evil Dead Rise, however, goes to a much darker and twisted place. Instead of the fresh meat being a jock and a nerd, or a reductive rift on the whore and the virgin paradigm, here we have a mother and her 3 children. A wounded and sad family struggling to get by. Even after the red band trailers for Cronin's movie, I went in skeptical that Rise could or should be as brutal as any of the earlier pictures in the series. All the marketing gave away that poor Ellie, Alyssa Sutherland, the single mother of 3, would be possessed by demons and taunt her children by saying, "Mommy is with the maggots now." But the unwritten rule of horror is that the kids are almost always safe. Inverting a bond as universally sacred as that between a parent and child is disturbingly perverse, but even Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick knew where to draw the line in their respective versions of The Shining, a story about a father who ultimately tries to murder his son with an axe, or croquet mallet in the book. Kubrick and King concluded that it's hideous enough to see the threat of a murderous father on a rampage after the child, and rivers of blood flooding out from the elevator. Still, they have the good taste to never let Jackie Torrance or that bloody waterfall consume the kid. By contrast, Evil Dead Rise is utterly tasteless. Happily so. As soon Cronin's 2023 film introduces a coterie of neighbors and acquaintances for Ellie's family, the movie lulls the most jaded viewers like myself into a sense of complacency. Here is the film's cannon fodder. And sure enough, those tertiary characters die screaming. It's a mockingly self-aware subversion, though, that possessed Ellie eviscerates them off-screen, with her sister Auntie Beth, Lily Sullivan, and the audience struggling to glimpse the carnage through an apartment door's peephole as an entire tenement floor is sent home to Jesus, or the other place. These characters add to the body count, but they're not the source of the film's main sense of horror. Rather, Evil Dead Rise prefers going there, breaking a taboo that neither Kubrick or even Aliens era James Cameron would dream of. It kills the kids. Not only does it kill the children, but it makes their corruption and eventual mutilation the result of a mother's affection. It's also treated as a punchline in humor darker than a moonless night. This begins with poor Bridget, Gabrielle Eccles, the teenage daughter of Ellie and the audience surrogate who tells her brother Danny, Morgan Davies, not to take the Book of the Dead from that bank vault or to open it. She's thus the first kid to be damned to the fires of hell. When her mother attacks, she initially comes close to losing an eye. Instead, she is left with a scar across the cheek. This would be the typical close call in wide-release American horror movies, and yet that nick across the face festers, molders, and within a few scenes is spreading over the rest of her body as she's vomiting maggots in the kitchen. By the time her aunt discovers something is wrong, she's chewing on a wine glass, vividly swallowing sharp broken shards while saying in a snickering demonic voice, "I have to kill the creepy crawlies in my tummy." Next, Danny, as the dimwit who opened the Book of the Dead, is soon butchered by his sister and likewise comes back as a deadeye. And through it all, the youngest child, Cassie, Nell Fisher, lives to see her mother, her sister, and then her last remaining sibling turn into rotting ghouls cackling at the prospect of dismembering her. The film, fortuitously, doesn't go so far as to kill the youngest child, but all sorts of questions about psychological damage and therapy are raised. Evil Dead Rise even sinks to submerging the kid and her aunt in a full Kubrickian bloodbath before it gushes out of an elevator, and the little girl then seeing her mother and siblings turned into a Cronenberg-like monstrosity of intermingled flesh that Aunt Beth winds up chainsawing and kicking into a metal shredder. The violence of this climax is so over the top, so garishly blood-soaked that it left several colleagues visibly shaken. And I'll concede this much to their complaints. There is certainly something to be said about the merits of tact, unless you're watching an Evil Dead movie. It's the movie's unapologetic ugliness that I think makes this a standout addition to the Deadeye mythos. No one's ever comes to these movies for their intricate plotting or character work, they're here for the ruthlessness. And Evil Dead Rise has no mercy when it develops the characters just enough to make this feel like a real family. Before Evil Dead Rise, Cronen's sole feature-length effort was The Hole in the Ground, 2019, a solid if aloof A24 horror that was lumped by critics into the questionable box labeled elevated horror. With his continued interest in character work by his actors, some might be reminded of that alleged movement currently going on in the genre. There are certainly more psychologically tinged chillers eager to explore family dynamics these days, and in such efforts the death of a child might entreat the viewer to consider the existential despair of life on a Calvinist farm, or perhaps the horrors of an American family unit enduring mourning, guilt, and recrimination. In Evil Dead Rise, it's used purely, gleefully, to repulse the audience and taunt you. The movie is like a demon vomiting on the boundary lines drawn by those who might insist movies must have morals, if not a nationalized censorship board. It may never be released on a VHS cassette tape, but the story crafted by Evil Dead Rise just put some genuinely nasty video out into the world. One of the absolute highlights of South by Southwest 2023, in a week of wall-to-wall joy-inducing madness, was watching the premiere of Evil Dead Rise with a rabid genre-loving audience. We gleefully lapped up every excessively bloody, outrageously gory, and spectacularly unhinged moment. It's official, I thought as the end credits rolled and the theater erupted in thunderous applause. Evil Dead is back in all its gruesome glory, and writer-director Lee Cronin has a certifiable horror hit on his hands. Like kids in a candy store, we were all just so damn excited to be there, save for one ridiculous post-screening Q&A heckler who was handily dealt with by the one and only Bruce Campbell, proving he's not just an on-screen badass. We weren't the only ones. The passion, enthusiasm, and genuine, unadulterated love for the franchise from Cronin was palpable, and it's that beating heart of true devotion that makes Evil Dead Rise such a joyful experience, as well as a wildly thrilling ride. It's no easy task taking the helm of such a beloved franchise, one of the few iconic horror properties that have been consistently excellent, from the moment Sam Raimi and actor Bruce Campbell first unleashed holy hell on an unsuspecting world back in 1981. The franchise began as a truly terrifying, delightfully depraved gorefest before embracing glorious camp and hilarity and then circling back to its gnarly, rapacious roots with the Evil Dead reboot in 2013. It's the kind of grisly but oh so groovy orchestra that's exceedingly difficult to conduct. But Cronin steps up to that podium, raises his baton, and creates a staggering kind of harmonious fusion that evokes the maestro Raimi at his best. Not only does Cronin nail Raimi's flair for theatrics and buckets of blood, but he also honors his signature visual style with some wicked tracking shots through the forest and cameras that snake, spiral, and whiz through the air, which have become hallmarks of the franchise. The camera work as a whole is mighty impressive, with plenty of dazzling Dutch angles, wide shots, and extreme close-ups. It begins with an outstanding cold open that pays loving homage to the franchise. It gives us that comfortable return to cabin carnage before reinventing the series by transporting us to a Los Angeles high-rise apartment for a new breed of terror. We end up at the dilapidated apartment by way of guitar tech Beth, Lily Sullivan, whose life felt like it was spiraling out of control even before she found out she was pregnant. Desperate and scared, she goes to see her somewhat estranged older sister Ellie, Alyssa Sutherland, a tattoo artist and mother to 3 kids. The oldest son, aspiring DJ Danny, Morgan Davies, the middle child, rebellious Bridget, Gabrielle Eccles, and the youngest, the precocious Cassie, Nell Fisher. Ellie's husband has recently taken off, leaving her a stressed single mom. So, the arrival of her flaky kid sister isn't exactly met with open arms. As the sisters try to reconnect, the kids are sent out for pizza. But as they're returning, a massive earthquake hits and opens up a hole in the ground of the building's parking garage. Danny sees some old vinyl records that he snags and, as he explores further, a very strange-looking book. He grabs it as well, despite pleas from his sister Bridget to leave the creepy artifacts where he found them. When he gets back home, he quickly gets to exploring his treasures, throwing the vinyl, which turns out to be odd recordings of people chanting, on the turntable and prying open the skin and teeth-covered Book of the Dead. Obviously, it's an exceedingly bad idea. Of course, he unleashes a demon that immediately kills Ellie in a horrific way involving elevator wires that creatively invoke the memory of those monstrous tree branches from Raimi's brutal vision. But before the kids can mourn the loss of their loving mom, she resurrects and transforms into something sinister, ghoulish, maniacal, and bloodthirsty. The demon-possessed matriarch is played with menacing zeal and nastiness as she terrorizes her own family with gusto. Sutherland seems to relish every moment of the savage villainy with a side of twisted black humor her character calls for, devouring scenery and delighting at every demented turn. It's an equally powerful performance from Sullivan, who delivers emotional gravitas while effortlessly evolving into a shotgun-wielding, demon-desolating, blood-soaked badass when necessary. That includes a standout performance from the young Fisher, who is extraordinary and impossible not to love. Her iconic, Staffany, a makeshift doll head staff, is hilarious and endearing, a real fan favorite. Though this film is far more focused on explosive action and visceral practical effects than character-driven drama, Cronin still manages to create characters worth rooting for without ever taking his foot off the pedal of this non-stop, unstaunched rollercoaster ride. It's a rather cruel trick giving us a cast of likable innocents and putting them all in perilous danger, with total disregard for the standard horror movie rules that suggest kids should remain safe from the brutality. Draw a line, and he exuberantly crosses it, unapologetic about how much he shocks or scars the unsuspecting audience. And I mean that, of course, as the highest of compliments. It's the kind of fearless, no-holds-barred filmmaking that makes genre fans giddy. Cronin goes hard, sparing no sacred cows and pulling no punches. Cronin makes masterful use of his location, turning everyday objects into shiver-inducing weapons, like the already infamous cheese grater. The carnage is plentiful and potent, with enough jaw-dropping havoc to please the most gluttonous connoisseur of gore. There's also just enough playful fan service, including the obligatory chainsaw, to make franchise fans feel warm and fuzzy. Cronin knows how to hit the accelerator with fury, careening into madness while still somehow keeping the bullet train on the rails. You've heard me say it many times before. But please, for the love of horror, see this spectacular splatterfest in the theater if you can. Enjoy it on the biggest screen possible, with immersive surround sound and an enthralled audience. Sharing every single gasp, scream, giggle, whoop, and holler with others will only heighten your enjoyment and ensure you get maximum kicks from this killer flick. It's a film that more than satiates the hunger for the familiar beats of a revered cult franchise, respecting its gnarled roots and honoring a notable legacy while rising above expectations, subverting the all-too-familiar to create something fresh, innovative, and wholly original. Thank you for subscribe, goodbye and see you again in next video.